the issues of environmental protection, issues of our environmental health, and we were involved with toxic pollution issues back in the 90s. And then we got invited by our elders, our spiritual authorities, and our traditional communities to take part in these United Nations climate meetings. 1998 was the first United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. My first meeting was Conference of the Parties, COP4 in Argentina. There was only 8 indigenous peoples there, from only about 4 coming from Argentina. Only 8 of us representing the world. So we have grown now. There's many of you now. I'm really happy you are here participating. It's a big issue that impacts us all. So we are co-hosting this session here in our Indigenous Pavilion. It was not easy to get our own Indigenous Pavilion like this. And but I'm happy to have a global initiative, the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. Alex is here. He's going to introduce himself. He lives in Quito, and so we are co-hosting this event. Am I right on Quito? No? Oh, Bogota. Yeah, there's a big difference. I've been to both, so I know the difference, but I forgot he's from Bogota. So we also have another sister organization, Indigenous Climate Action, based in Canada. So we're proud to be able to host this session. And where I come from with the United States, including First Nations in Canada, we have a long history of confronting colonization. The settlers who came to our lands came from Europe. And as you may know, the challenge is that they have a way of thinking that disregards who we are. They think that we're pagans, they think that we're uncivilized, and that we all run around naked. And the colonizers, we call them settlers. So we have a long history, over 500 years, of the impact of the colonizers who have come to our land. So it's always been about defending our land and territories. We are the first peoples of where we come from. So we always now have been working on the rights of indigenous people, but we strategically say we have inherent rights as indigenous people because we were here first, and we have the collective rights. We are not fighting for our individual rights, we're fighting for our collective rights as peoples. The S on peoples is very important. That's why when we first came into the United Nations bodies, I see a friend of mine, Jose Francisco Cali from Guatemala. He knows we used to sit there at the UN and it says indigenous people, no S, and we used to put a piece of paper with the S and tape it on there. But the UN and the country, they come and take it off. They take it off until we got the recognition of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples with the S. I want to say that as the context because we are familiar with treaties, negotiating treaty agreements at the highest level with the countries that have come into our lands and territories. So from the north, we have a long history of treaty agreements. But it's very hard. Once you have them agree to something, they break it. They break it. So there's always a question of how do we hold them accountable? So as we got involved in our network in the UN climate meetings, we hear the same double talk that they want to address climate change. That was in 1998, and here we are in 2023. There's a lot of language that the big governments are saying. we're fighting for a phase out of fossil fuels. Very important. My elders back home, they have ceremonies. They say, after I explain the greenhouse effect, they ask a lot of questions. And then they say, there's too much of this greenhouse gases, too much of this carbon dioxide. They understand it comes from the tailpipes of the trucks and cars, the smokestack of the oil refineries. Even in Canada, when they dig into the Mother Earth and take out the fossil fuels, that's like a tar, bitumen, oil sands, they can smell it. They understand then, they say Mother Earth and Father Sky cannot absorb any more carbon dioxide. So I sit here with the authority of mandates of my elders who say you have to fight that this world, they gotta turn the valve off. No more production, no more mining, no more the burning combustion of the fossil fuels. It's killing the planet, Mother Earth, and it's affecting our people. So they say that, that's the way. So I became aware of this global initiative where they looked at how the governments formed a treaty to deal with the nuclear energy, the nuclear waste, and it was a similar strategy that was very successful where governments of the world can sign on to a non-proliferation of nuclear power, nuclear waste. And so this group got together and say, let's try that approach on fossil fuels. Let's develop a treaty initiative. And our Indigenous Environmental Network looked at it, said this is very interesting to us. We understand treaties. Maybe this is something that they can get different governments one at a time to agree to sign a treaty that they will be committed to reduce, to phase out their dependency on fossil fuels. And so our network became a member of this initiative. But it was challenging is a question, how do we as Indigenous people take part in this? What are the benefits for us, no matter where you live? You know, what are the challenges of this? So that's what this session is, and I'm at the end, our one of the people who work for IEN, Brenna Two Bears, she's going to speak last and cover anything I may have missed because she has on-the-ground experience talking to Native people from the U.S., Canada, and Indigenous peoples of the world on this challenge. So I'm going to turn it over now to Alex to introduce himself and give a brief understanding of what this this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. I have a hard time proliferation, you know, but he understands what that word means. And thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's really an honor to be here on this stage. As you said, I live on the land of the Muisca people, which is Bogota, and I grew up on the land of the Ghana people. The idea of a treaty to resist the expansion of fossil fuels is based in centuries of struggle. It's been Indigenous peoples across the world who have led that struggle against the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, whether it's the Ogoni people in Nigeria, whether it is Indigenous peoples in Australia against the expansion of coal, or these compas from Ecuador against petróleo, against oil in the Amazon, and of course the Indigenous Environment Network against many pipelines and frontiers in Turtle Island. And I also just wanted to share personally one of the first times I came to the COP was COP 15. So and I went to a press conference where Tom was speaking, and he spoke very clearly about the risk of the Copenhagen Agreement, which was COP 15 was Copenhagen, and the risk that instead of focusing on the problem and the polluters and on the interests of people, we would instead follow a path of financializing nature and focus instead on a system for generating carbon credits and offsets. And we wouldn't focus on the real problem behind it. And those words still stuck with me. And so a few years ago, when IEN, amongst many other organizations across the world, came together and said, since Paris, we've still seen that the fossil fuel industry is expanding. We've seen that banks are continuing to put more money into fossil fuels than before. We've seen that governments are approving more and new projects to expand the industry, and that no country has a real plan to get out of fossil fuels, even though that's clearly what's required. Not only to confront the climate crisis, it's an essential element of confronting the climate crisis is constraining fossil fuels, but also for the so-called biodiversity crisis, the crisis of nature. The fossil fuel extraction is one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss, of the loss of life on this planet, whether that's life in our forests, in the mountains, or in the oceans. And the fossil fuel industry also poisons water, and it poisons the air, and it poisons people. It's not only a risk to the climate, it's a risk to life in general. So we have to find a way to address fossil fuels directly. And so social movements and like IEN and like other organizations across the world founded the idea of a campaign for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. I'm very happy to be speaking in English because I also can't say it in Spanish. But the idea of non-proliferation, borrowing from the metaphor of the nuclear treaty, is this. Firstly, fossil fuels are a weapon of mass destruction. They are a risk to all life on the planet, just like nuclear weapons. And so we need a treaty to address them just like nuclear weapons. And just like how we approach nuclear weapons, we should have three clear principles in addressing them. The first is non-proliferation, which means no new. We have to stop and set the boundary and the limit and say there can be no new contracts, exploration, projects in the fossil fuel industry. Because we know that each new project pushes us further over the 1.5 degree limit. And we know each new project threatens often the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples, the interests and the well-being of local communities. So we can have no new. The second principle in the nuclear treaty is called disarmament. And in the fossil fuel context, it is the equitable phase down and phase out of existing production. As Tom said, we live in a world that is already dependent on the structure of fossil fuels in our energy systems and our economies. We cannot turn off from one day to the next. So we need a plan to turn off and actually rehabilitate and reclaim the territories destroyed and harmed by the fossil fuel industry. And that is something that can be negotiated and agreed at the international level. But we'll only be able to do that if we have the third pillar, which in the nuclear proliferation metaphor was the peaceful transition, and in this case is the just transition. How do we ensure that the transition to a new energy system does not replicate the problems of the existing energy system? We need to have a vision of how we support countries and communities and people to transition from fossil fuel-based economies and production and energy to a different model, but one that isn't extractivist also of the materials for the transition, one that respects free prior informed consent if there is going to be any extraction of the minerals that are required, one that has safeguards for labor rights and human rights all along the supply chain, and one that considers creating products that are not single use, but that are not going to be disposable and not going to add to the pollution crisis that we also face on this planet. So those are the three pillars of our vision for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And this proposal has been taken up by people and organizations and indigenous nations and trade unions and churches and mosques and synagogues and cities and the state of California and scientists and young people. And now 12 countries at this COP have all come together and said, we need a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Because the current process is too focused on non-binding, focus on emissions, focus on the financialization of nature, focus on credits and offsets and false solutions, and not actually talk about the problem. So we want to bring together countries that want to talk about the problem and want to talk about solutions. But we don't only want to bring together countries. Our vision is to innovate on solutions, and that means doing it differently. We don't want a negotiation where only countries are at the table. We want a negotiation where the people are present. And so Indigenous people's visions for the solutions is essential to this project. We really believe that there needs to be the perspectives of Indigenous peoples from Turtle Island, from South America, from Africa, across Asia, and in India, there are many resisting the expansion of coal who can bring their perspectives and negotiate about what the just transition should look like, how we can center Indigenous sovereignty in any treaty, and how we can realize real solutions to the climate crisis, which is a fossil fuel crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. I must mention, some of you seen a name of a speaker. She wasn't able to make it. She got sick today. She sends her regards and her apologies. And she's the Minister of the Environment and Agriculture from the Republic of Colombia. And that's Susanna Mohammed. And I met her early in the week at the Indigenous Caucus meeting. She came and spoke to the Indigenous peoples. Why I invited her is because Colombia announced their endorsement of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I thought it'd be very good to hear her speak to that. It's very historical, but also she realizes also that when they signed that, when they endorsed that treaty, I said it's important that, you know, Indigenous people from Colombia know about that, and other Latin American countries that have Indigenous peoples, because it means the challenge on improving your own relationship to the Indigenous peoples, lands and territories. And she wanted to start on that discussion as well. So she wasn't able to make it. Our next speaker is Daniel Santi Gorlina, it says here. Is it Gorlina or Gorlinga? Gorlinga, yeah. And he's Quechua from Sariaco in the Amazon of Ecuador. We know each other. I've been to their village. I went down the river in a little canoe, and the water was just right below the height of the canoe, and I thought I was going to tip over. The man that was controlling the motor and the man standing in the front of the canoe with the long pole, they know that river. So we didn't want to tip over, but that was a very memorable trip going down that river. And so I know that they've been fighting oil concessions for years. He's been involved with that struggle. He's been part of the case that Seriaco brought, the Ecuador case, and they've always been fighting and protecting against the exploitation of their lands and territories and oil companies. So he's here to share and to talk with us. And I have a question for you, Daniel, is tell us what this treaty would mean for your community. How could a treaty recognized by the UN help in your legal battles? Why should more indigenous people join the call to support the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty? Then what is happening in your community that you'd like to share with us? Thank you.
Saludos a todos. Yo creo que el consumo de recursos fósiles y los recursos extractivos es un vicio del sistema, y de ese vicio no podemos salir. Pero yo creo que los pueblos indígenas ya venimos durante los 48 años desde el Acuerdo de Roma, que comenzaron a discutir sobre el problema de la crisis climática, venimos planteando, venimos accionando fuertemente, y hasta ahora, y lo seguiremos, porque nuestra voz, nuestras propuestas, nuestras acciones en el territorio debe ser escuchado y conocido a nivel global. Yo creo que hay que trabajar justamente a nivel jurídico para que los estados reconozcan este acuerdo de no proliferación a los recursos fósiles. ¿Cómo? Los pueblos indígenas en las 7 regiones del mundo tenemos 36% de territorio, que es la mejor conservada, la que tiene mayor biodiversidad, que están intactas algunos, y todo gracias al conocimiento de los pueblos indígenas. El acuerdo global, el marco global del Convenio de la Biodiversidad que aprobaron en la COP15 en Montreal, en Canadá, el artículo 3 dice que los estados comprometen a conservar el 30% de los bosques, de los ríos, de todo. Yo creo que si los estados tienen la plena voluntad de conservar ese espacio que ellos ponen, yo creo que tendrían que reconocer lo que ya los pueblos indígenas estamos conservando aún más, el 36% de los espacios de vida. Y también tenemos que exigir de manera jurídica que estos espacios de vida sea reconocido como una nueva categoría de conservación propia de los pueblos indígenas, y que estos espacios de vida estén a perpetuidad libre de la actividad extractiva. Este es el compromiso que los pueblos y los pueblos indígenas estamos luchando, estamos exigiendo. Por lo tanto, en el contexto ecuatoriano, nosotros ya estamos trabajando una ley borrador para que el Estado reconozca esta categoría a los territorios indígenas de los pueblos y nacionalidades. Y también vamos a exigir para que el Estado de Ecuador adopte y comprometa ser parte de este acuerdo internacional de no proliferación a los combustibles fósiles. Yo creo que hay que exigir desde todos los espacios, desde todos los países en Latinoamérica, en las 7 regiones del mundo, a los estados para que adopten esta norma internacional. Caso contrario, ahora los resultados de esta COP no quieren firmar este acuerdo. Hay pocos países que han firmado, pocos. Entonces yo creo que desde el territorio, desde nuestro espacio de vida, tenemos que luchar y exigir este derecho para que se comprometan verdaderamente. Y en el tema de la transición energética, yo creo que hay dos dicotomías bien fuertes. Para construir las energías solares necesita también de los minerales. Para construir las palas eólicas también necesitamos, por ejemplo, el boom de la balsa en la Amazonía, recién nomás en el tiempo de COVID, arrasó todos los árboles de balsa. Yo creo que en ese sentido, los pueblos indígenas tenemos que trabajar de la mano con el Estado, estrategias, planes, metodologías para que construyamos políticas públicas a la transición energética. Exigir de esa forma con los estados. Caso contrario, los estados van a seguir ampliando más áreas, más explotaciones y todo. Ya en el Ecuador, el nuevo presidente ha dicho que va a explotar más, pero nosotros hemos puesto en alerta máxima de que no vamos a permitir esa explotación. Yo creo que a Brasil también le han hecho callar esta vez. Yo creo que Brasil tiene bastante Amazonía, bastantes recursos estratégicos. Yo creo que también hay que trabajar, hacer un movimiento fuerte y planificar también para la COP30 que el movimiento indígena, los sectores sociales, los sectores de derechos, los sectores ambientales y todo, vayamos unidos para tener una posición firme a nivel global y demostrar que la alternativa somos nosotros. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, thank you. His brother Marlon Santi, he walked and marched with us in Copenhagen. Alex mentioned Copenhagen as one of the UN meetings that was held. And has a long history in Copenhagen. I'll tell you about it someday. But yes, one of the things that I recognize in this treaty initiative under their global just transition is the recognition of human rights, the recognition of the rights of indigenous peoples. It's very important as they lift up this pillar in this movement. And it has to be brought up in their discussions with the countries of the world. Our next speaker is Juan Bay, who also comes from the Ecuadorian Amazon, Huaorani leader. He's born in his own community, and he has a long history of working in a leadership position. And one of the things that he has done is been a community director of an education program there, and been active on these many struggles. So, Juan, I have a question of you. What is happening in your community that you like to speak about? And then how could a mechanism like this treaty, fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, help you, help your people? But also, how can it be improved? Thank you.
Hola. Muchas gracias, hermanos y hermanas. Muchas gracias a todos quienes acompañan este espacio de panel. Creo que después de varios días en ese espacio de Dubái, hemos alzado voces, pero la situación es tan dura que vivimos desde la Amazonía, desde nuestro territorio, a veces no se visualiza en ese espacio, no se visualiza desde este mundo. En el Ecuador, hace 20 de agosto, fue como ejemplo de la lucha sobre la consulta Sial-Yasuní. Los pueblos Huaorani, después de 50 años de la explotación petrolera, después de 50 años del contacto de la civilización, nosotros somos los pueblos del inicio de contacto, la única de las nacionalidades en la Amazonía ecuatoriana. Quedan dos pueblos que son Tagaytay y Taromenane en aislamiento voluntario en el Ecuador. Creo que tenemos que dar como un proceso, un procedimiento, ejemplo a seguir de la lucha en el Ecuador sobre el 20 de agosto, que con el apoyo de con 60% de la suma de los pueblos ecuatorianos en el Ecuador, dijo Sial Yasuní para que el petróleo quede bajo subsuelo, dentro del territorio, dentro del Parque Nacional Yasuní. Parque Nacional Yasuní es el lugar más diverso y más grande de la planeta del mundo, donde que se habló mucho, donde que se visualizó mucho, donde que los pueblos indígenas existimos en ese espacio. Hoy hemos sido ejemplo para la sociedad, hoy hemos sido ejemplo para el país, hemos sido ejemplo para el mundo de que los pueblos indígenas, los pueblos guaraní, también damos soluciones desde territorio. Hoy estamos hablando mucho aquí, pero los pueblos indígenas desde la selva, desde la tierra, no conocen lo que está tratando hoy. Las negociaciones de los gobiernos no saben absolutamente nada. Pero habemos pocos líderes, habemos esos tipos de participación, esos tipos de espacio para alzar la voz, pero el gobierno, los poderes políticos, los poderes económicos no conocen la situación real y ni siquiera entienden que los pueblos indígenas somos quienes salvamos sobre el cambio climático, somos quienes ayudamos sobre que la humanidad podamos mantener hoy en día con el aire, con el agua, que así podamos salvar la vida. Entonces, en mi territorio, después de 50 años hemos dado cuenta de que la explotación petrolera no ha sido una transformación, una lucha, sino al contrario, nos ha traído problemas de enfermedades, problemas ambientales, problemas culturales, problemas de cambio. Entonces eso nos ha significado que la petrolera es la muerte. Por eso el territorio guaraní hemos decretado como un territorio de estado de emergencia por muchas situaciones. En tema de salud, en tema de educación, en tema de desarrollo. Los pueblos guaraní día a día se están muriendo con enfermedades por la explotación petrolera. En mi territorio hay 10 campos petroleros donde que inicia en la Amazonía ecuatoriana de la explotación petrolera, cuando inicia los pueblos guaraní en el contacto. Los pueblos guaraní hemos sido esforzados sobre la civilización, sobre el contacto. Hoy, el 20 de agosto, hemos sido ejemplo de la lucha, de que desde este territorio hemos dado solución sobre la consulta. Hoy necesitamos pelear base jurídica, un proceso legal, proceso técnico, para nosotros poder visualizar y hacer ver al mundo de que nosotros también damos solución desde este territorio, desde nuestras casas, porque en ese espacio de territorio tenemos todo, lo que es mercancía, lo que es alimento, lo que es tema de cultura, territorio, lengua, porque de eso se trata la cultura, de eso se trata el territorio, de eso se trata la naturaleza, porque sin territorio los pueblos indígenas no somos nadie, sin lengua no somos pueblo. Entonces aquí habemos con diferentes lenguas, diferentes identidades, pero creo que el Ecuador ha sido ejemplo para el mundo sobre la consulta. De esos 10 campos de tanta lucha hemos exigido y estamos exigiendo para que retire las herramientas, los equipos del bloque 43 que está en el Parque Nacional Yasuní. Creo que los pueblos guaraní, después de haber luchado, haber sido ejemplo sobre la consulta, también queremos hablar que cómo podemos yasunizar el mundo, de que cómo podemos salvar al mundo. Porque es una frase que tenemos que hacer una práctica, alzar la voz de que ya tenemos que hablar yasunizar el mundo, yasunizar la planeta, de que hemos sido ejemplo de este Yasuní. Porque si nosotros salvamos a la naturaleza, hemos salvado a la humanidad, porque hay pueblos en aislamiento voluntario que ellos en sí no pueden alzar la voz, pero estamos nosotros para defender a los pueblos originarios, porque ellos están ahí, porque ellos necesitan de nosotros y ellos necesitan de nosotros también necesitamos de ellos, porque y así los pueblos también que han estado rodeando y ha estado pendiente, monitoreando su territorio. Pero el Estado ecuatoriano, el gobierno, nunca ha rendido la cuenta. Ha habido muerte por la activista petrolera y el Estado ecuatoriano absolutamente no ha hecho nada. Entonces, yo como presidente he tratado de trabajar en ese sentido, de visualizar al mundo, de visualizar ese espacio. Y los combustibles fósiles están matando al mundo y esto tiene que cambiar para para los guaraní seguir protegiendo y el yasoní y la vida. Entonces, como reflexión, les invito a todos en este espacio, deseamos parte del problema y también seamos parte de solución. Busco la unidad, busco la paz que a la mano de los pueblos indígenas también podemos dar y resolver los problemas de este territorio, porque ya lo hicimos y tenemos capacidad para salvar y defender la naturaleza y madre tierra. Muchas gracias y buenos días con todos.
Thank you very much. What you are hearing is an indigenous movement that is getting stronger from throughout the world. I've heard presentations from our indigenous peoples here that continues every year now, that we are the solution. We are not the problem. We are the solution. But we also take on the big systems, the capitalism. We deal with imperialism and militarization and the takings of our land. Right now, in a lot of these sessions, there are certain countries that will weaken interventions where we are demanding strong language that recognizes the human rights and the rights of indigenous peoples. Bolivia put forward a term of Mother Earth in the Article 6. It was the United States that we don't understand what Mother Earth means. There's no definition of it. Those of us from the North, we just shook our head and it made us angry. Like we want to go over there and teach our own government. So this movement is strong, our voices. So at this time, we have a youth from the Pacific. And this is very important because in this movement of this treaty initiative of countries throughout the world, our relatives of the Pacific, the island states have endorsed this treaty. Why? Because they're concerned about the rising tide, the reality that the ocean is going to flood their islands, the melting of the ice in the north. It's real issue. So we thank the initiative and all the people involved. Islands like Vanuatu, Tuvalu, Fiji, Tonga, and others, they have endorsed this treaty. So at this time, we have a representative from Fiji, and she is a youth from the Pacific Climate Warriors at 350 Fiji. And she's been working on these issues. And her name is Sarah Lagilagi Saini.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Lang Lang Saini. I am from the beautiful island of Malacca, Vanambalavulau, located in the eastern side of Fiji. I have maternal links to Naweni, Savsavu, Takondrove, in Vanuatu, the second big island in Fiji. I introduced myself because that is normally how we introduce ourselves back at home. We introduce ourselves stating where our father is from and where our mothers are from, because that is where we get our identity, the land. And the treaty is something of very importance to us because it shows our commitment that we make into keeping a sustainable environment back at home. Those are the things that really help not only keep our environment, keep the sustainability of our environment, but also keep our identity, our culture is preserved within the lands and islands. Some of the things that, sorry. Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, some of the things that I've been doing as a youth advocate back at home is that I've gathered my friends, my fellow youths, and we go out and advocate on these issues. We advocate on the importance of sustaining our culture. We advocate on the importance of transitioning out of fossil fuels and into a more sustainable and resilient environment, resilient country that we can live in, because it's not going to affect us only, but also our generations, our children, and our children's children. And so just last week, my friends, the youths that I work with, they attended a National Youth Council. And this youth council has been dormant for 8 years, and we're just trying to revive that. And just last week, they had a whole week to themselves in order to find out ways to revive this youth council. And this youth council helps us put our voices out there to the so that the governments can hear us, so that our leaders can hear our cries as youth in keeping our country safe. And also, our team, the Pacific Climate Warriors, has set up the Kato Fund. Kato Fund is a funding mechanisms that help the Pacific countries in. It's a simple funding mechanisms that helps the Pacific countries during climate crisis. And also, another thing is that we've also done power-up events. 70 youths from around the Pacific gathered in Fiji for power-up event training. And later on, we've also done a call out for power-up to phase out of fossil fuels, call out our leaders to keep the commitment of 1.5, call out climate finance, and all those. And to the Pacific, the youth can say, our voice can be loud, but many voices are louder. And bringing together youths, bringing together Indigenous youths in doing this climate work, in this environmental space, will bring out more of our cries, will strengthen the cries and add on to those that have done this before us. And our generation is coming up to keep that safe. And one of the things that has been affecting Fiji for quite a while is rising of sea levels and the unpredictable weather patterns that changes. Back in 2016, we were hit with a major cyclone called Cyclone Winston, which is a Category 6 cyclone, and it destroyed the country, really destroyed the country. But our elders have told us that my generation, the youths of Fiji, have faced more cyclones compared to their time. And the cyclones that we faced is more intense compared to their time. So calling together the youths of Fiji and Indigenous youth around the globe to come together and strengthen our voices to address these issues, and also so that we can be resilient and have a sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to turn it over to our last speaker, but not the least speaker, important, because part of her work is to help bring attention to this treaty initiative to Indigenous peoples. It's only one person doing this, but there's many of you here that she can start to work with, who can help to become educators and organizers around this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So Brenna Two Bears is working with us, and she has a few words to share with you.
Yeah, it's hello? Can you guys hear me? Okay. Yeah, it's she Brenna Two Bears Unishia. Twitch eatni nishle, touch eatni dashche. Wanagire wangshik bashichin, standing raksu dashanella. Hello everyone. My name is Brenna Two Bears, and I am Warrior Clan and Bitterwater Clan. My paternal grandfather is from Standing Rock, and my maternal grandfather is Red Running Through the Water clan. And in these ways, I come to you as a Ho-Chunk, Navajo, and Standing Rock woman. I'm from Flagstaff, Arizona, and Black River Falls, Wisconsin. These places to me are my home. This is where my people have been for a long time. We know the land, and we are the land. This is my home, and I want you all to think of your home. I want you to think of the house that you grew up in and the food that your mother cooked for you. I want you to think of the stories that your paternal figure shared with you, and of your kids and your nieces and nephews and your grandkids that share that home with you and share their joy with you. Now I want you to think about what you would do if your little sister was taken. What would you do if your mother fell ill? How would you feed yourself? What water would you drink if it was being used to transport coal? If it was being used in a city that is miles away from where you live and denying you your right to clean water? Because that is the reality in a lot of the communities that I'm from. Our Indigenous sisters and our women go missing and murdered. Our families out in Navajo do not have running water. And our people have suffered from coal mining, from the tar sands, from pipelines that poison our water and put our livelihoods at risk. It's not a question for us of which future generation is going to feel the consequence of our government's choices, but rather which one of us is going to go next. And this is why the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty is such an important mechanism. It's why when I first heard about it, I thought, this is it. This is the solution. I've never heard of anything like this before. And I can only think of the time when I was with my family at Standing Rock and we were facing down the military from our own country because we wanted to protect our right to clean water. And we're still fighting that fight today. They're still trying to insist that it's not only the most sensible choice, but even the safest choice, the most realistic choice to continue to build this pipeline that will burst and it will get into Lake Oahe and it will affect the drinking water of 10 million people. This is still a fight that we're fighting today. But it wouldn't have to be fought if we had something like the Fossil Fuel Treaty in place. If the U.S. government and other northern governments from the global north took their historical responsibility and honored it. If they thought of something outside of their own greed and outside of the capitalism that is running our world. Because there are other countries and there are other Indigenous communities that are being held in that economic chokehold of this extractive system. And if it's not going to be the fossil fuels, we're already seeing that it's going to be something else. Like my brothers were talking about, the batteries that are being made in order for us to have clean energy are made from lithium. And that lithium comes from the earth. And the people that are protecting that earth and living above those potential mining areas are Indigenous people. So it's not just fossil fuels, it's not just these extractive systems, it's that culture of greed, it's that culture of capitalism that we also need to address. And that's part of why the just transition that the treaty talks about is something that is in line that we at the Indigenous Environmental Network talk about. Because what we want is an Indigenous just transition. What we want is a systems change and a cultural change. One where we are not always taking, but instead have this culture of giving, this culture that says we don't all want our own electric vehicle. We don't all need to have constant access to all of the world whenever we want it. But instead, what can we do for our neighbors who live next to us? How do we support our community on a small scale? How do we make sure that we're able to leave an earth for our future generations? And this is part of why I had originally joined the Fossil Fuel Treaty at its beginning, back in 2020. And it was through the treaty that I was able to meet, finally, face-to-face, the Indigenous Environmental Network. And it's amazing because I didn't know you could do this as a job. I thought I was just doing it for free in my own downtime. I thought it was just something I was doing with my family to protect our rights and our livelihood and Mother Earth. And instead, I found that there's a whole global community of people who are fighting for the same thing, of people who can commit their whole professional and also personal lives to making sure that we leave something for our next 7 generations. And so it's really an honor and a privilege to be up here and to speak with you all about this, because it's something that I feel very, very strongly about. And it's something that all of the communities that I work with in the Indigenous Environmental Network and the communities that I come from, it's something that's very important to them, and it's something that's important to me. And I am so thankful that you all are here. And I really urge you all to share this out or to talk with your communities about why this is such an important initiative. And I want to say thank you so much all for joining us. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. I want to ask Alex, how do people get involved? I know that in a lot of my discussions here with Indigenous peoples from all over the world, they're interested in this. They have a lot of questions. And how do they get involved? You know, we have one person, Brenna, who is tasked to help to start initiative. I'm a member of the executive committee, and then Koika has a representation on the executive committee too. Daniel networks with Koika, many of the Amazon area. And of course, we need more Indigenous participation. I think that's been some of the things, and the president or the chair of the treaty initiative sitting over here, Sephora, you know, and we have a long history with her on stopping the tar sands in Canada on that big campaign. But how do people get involved?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you to all the panelists for sharing the ways that your peoples have been building the resistance and the fight for life and against the industry of death. And I wanted to say, I mentioned that there were indigenous nations themselves who have endorsed the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and there are 9, the Awajan, the Achua, the Kantozi, the Chapra, the Quichua, the Pastasa, the Kukama, the Kakuamira, the Shawi, the Shiwilu, and the Wampis, from what we call Peru, and they form part of the Coordinadora Regional de los Pueblos Indígenas de San Lorenzo. They have all, as nations, endorsed the call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. This campaign is, we call it a directed network. It is a network of organizations and individuals and institutions and nations pushing in the same direction. So there's not one way to get involved. We don't tell people how to or how not to get involved. what we want to do is offer you opportunities to think about, one, could this demand help strengthen your argument where you are? Could it help you engage new and different voices? Because it's an idea that does engage new and different voices. Could it be, would your people or peoples want to contribute to a conversation about the mechanisms and making it real and engage in the discussions in that process to help us Yasuniize the world and to add some mechanisms of cooperation that could help with that. So we have a small international support team. Some of those folks are here. And we have some core partners like IEN and Brenna who are touchstones. They're people that people can get in touch with if they want to do and know more. And so if you're based in Turtle Island, we encourage you to get in touch with Brenna and with IEN. If you're in the Amazon, with COICA and with the organizations and the nations that make up that a confederation. We have also a lead person now in Latin America, who unfortunately he already left, but he will be a good point person. And we have our partner at MOSIC, which is based in Peru, and they have several organizers who have been very involved. And in the Pacific Climate Warriors have been leading this fight. They are not drowning but fighting, and they've added the call for a fossil fuel treaty to that fight as well. And so we encourage you to get in touch with each of them to see how you could take the call for the fossil fuel treaty up in your community or in your nation, and how you could join us in better defining and developing our proposals so that the fossil fuel treaty that we collectively build recognizes and secures and advances the rights of Indigenous peoples.
Thank you, Alex. And Alex mentioned earlier a couple of the concerns because they are supporting cutting emissions at source. Very important. And in the treaty agreement, they denounce greenwashing by fossil fuel industry. I'm going to conclude with just a short story, is that in the north, in San Francisco, in the city of San Francisco, on the western coastline of the Pacific Ocean, there's a small town called Richmond. If people have been to Richmond, is that it's full of oil refineries. It's like a city of lights, and it's oil refineries of Chevron. And there's always explosions in that oil refinery. There's a long history of decades of the people who live right near that oil refinery city dying of respiratory illnesses, cancer, lung ailments. Many of the people there are people of color, African American, Latino, Indigenous that have been relocated from the reservations of the rural to the city, Asian people, poor white people. So this issue is a big issue. And so we've done some organizing in that area. And these people, I'm going to just explain things that they ask Chevron. They say, Chevron, we know there's a big issue with climate. How come you're not cutting back your pollution from the oil refinery? You keep on expanding. They are expanding more oil refinement since 2015 at the Paris Agreement. We see contradictions that relate to the need to have governments endorse a treaty, no more expansion. Since 2015, there's been $5.5 trillion increase of banks investing in fossil fuels. $5.5 trillion. We are part of the Banking on Climate Chaos report. You can find it on our webpage. So these issues, back to the community when they talk to Chevron, this is only my interpretation of what they say to the people. They say, you don't understand. The community says, what is it that we don't understand? They say, we are going carbon neutral. We are going carbon neutral. Yes, we are producing emissions, but you don't understand. The community says, I'm confused. What is carbon neutral? They say, well, we're investing money in carbon credits, pieces of paper. We are investing in the protection of the trees in the Amazon. And the community says, I don't understand. You say you're going carbon neutral here, but we're still dying of the pollution. And you're saying you're going carbon neutral by investing in the protection of the trees in the Amazon and the tropics and other regions of the world. How is that helping us? So that's what they say to local people. Carbon neutral, carbon offsets, carbon credits. And we find through reports and studies now that these carbon markets, carbon offsets, using our forests as an offset, does not cut emissions at source. The fossil fuel industry is even expanding. $5.5 trillion. We even heard lies and scams in the South when people say, I ask them, I go into the communities like Sariaku and other areas, Sapara, other areas, and they say, we're going to get money. They're going to pay us now to measure trees. We have a tape measure, and we have a clipboard and pencil. We're going to measure trees. And they say, I say, where's the money coming from? They said, the World Bank. They don't really know. I said, you know that money comes from Chevron, from Shell Oil, from Conoco. It comes from the polluters. That's where that money comes from. They're taking it and paying so they can look good on paper, so that governments can look good when they report their national reports. NDCs, they look good on paper. They offset their pollution. But we say that's a manipulation. My final comment on this that relates to the term greenwash by the corporations, okay, is that when anyone in the world brings like carbon, methane, greenhouse gases into a market system, a trading system, a capitalist system, they treat the carbon as a commodity. Just like agriculture, they treat the corn as a commodity. So in the legal system of capitalism, they got to determine whose property right it is to treat carbon as a commodity. So it's a property right issue. At the end of the day, it's an indigenous people that want to develop their own program and get their own property to the carbon. I don't know, that's up to your leadership. If you want to own the carbon and trade it yourself, I hear that's going on. Indigenous Red, reducing emissions from deforestation and degradation. But it's a property right. At the bottom line, it's Chevron. It's them owning the carbon. They own the trees or they rent the trees. So how do we push title of our lands in the south and the north? So we have to be clear when we say we support the phase out of fossil fuels. We have to do that with no false plans like this false solution of carbon trading. So I want to add that to this discussion because one reason that we joined this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is that they are against this greenwashing, and we gotta demand that they reduce the production and release of toxic emissions from fossil fuels. Thank you very much. A question. Be clear on your question. We have time for 2 questions. I don't know about 3. She's going to take the mic away from me. But okay, 3 questions. Be clear on saying who you are and ask a question of one of us and try to stay away from a statement.
Bueno, mi pregunta específicamente es para Alex. Me gustó mucho la pregunta que ustedes se han planteado en este tratado de proliferación de combustibles fósiles y es cómo nos aseguramos que la transición no reproduzca los problemas existentes. Mi pregunta es, mientras este tratado entra en rigor, ¿cómo podemos hacer desde la COP u otras instancias para reducir los impactos de los actuales proyectos extractivos? Porque pues vengo de un territorio que está minado por los proyectos extractivos que están sacando litio, cobre, níquel, piedras extrañas y demás, y que están vulnerando definitivamente los derechos humanos, pero también la biodiversidad, la soberanía alimentaria, están vulnerando también la vocación de los campesinos, etc. Lo segundo, frente a lo mismo, es que veo que este tratado es con pueblos indígenas. ¿Cómo hacemos para incorporar también poblaciones campesinas? Porque así como nosotros construimos estas narrativas aquí en la COP, asimismo los países construyen estos tratados y estas normativas o regulaciones. Entonces vamos a dejar por fuera a unas poblaciones que son supremamente importantes, sobre todo los países de América Latina, del sur global. Es eso, muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. Y la primera parte, yo diría que justo como tenemos que avanzar resistiendo la expansión de la industria de combustibles fósiles, tenemos que ir avanzando nuestra visión de la transición justa. No podemos esperar para un acuerdo internacional, tenemos que crear las condiciones en cada nación, en cada comunidad, mientras vamos construyendo el tratado que va a acelerar esa transición. Entonces, la respuesta a la visión de la transición justa es que tenemos que definir en el base nuestra visión para que tenemos el contenido y los asuntos para avanzar la propuesta a nivel internacional. La visión del tratado, de la campaña del tratado, es que podemos realizar cambio con presión de arriba, con presión del sistema internacional, con normas, con principios al nivel internacional y con presión de debajo, con las voces de las personas y las comunidades más impactadas. Entonces tenemos que definir estándares y visiones para la extracción, para la participación de comunidades impactadas y también en el desarrollo de planes de transición. Entonces esa sería la primera parte. Y la segunda es que, pues muy puntual, todavía no hemos definido cómo serían los mecanismos de participación de la sociedad civil adentro de cualquier negociación o proceso de tratado, pero la participación de campesinos y campesinas sería clave. Entonces es algo que les invito para participar, como en ese camino vamos desarrollando la propuesta. Muchísimas gracias.
Hello, Jean-Luc Purit, Tunica Biloxi Tribe of Louisiana, a president of North American Indian Center of Boston and visiting scholar over at MIT. I just really quickly wanted to know the state of the response related to the Essequibo region. So if there was any sort of any statements or any calls to action that we should be aware of coming from the FFNP.
Yeah, I mean, in general, we're a movement that calls for the respect of international law and call for that in the case of the conflict or emerging conflict between Venezuela and Guyana over the and in the response, we're also going to need to respect and listen to the indigenous peoples there. But we haven't made a more detailed statement than that. But our general principles as we look at the world is that the world will be better with more cooperation and more respect for international law, and that is what we want to see.
Yeah, I know we're running out of time. I think we're the last session for the whole pavilion, but our sister here has her hand up, and that'll be our last question right here, and then we'll conclude here.
Gracias, interesantes sus aportes. Mi nombre es Juana Toledo, yo soy maya de Guatemala. Yo quisiera también hacer una pregunta sobre el Tratado de la No Proliferación del Carbono. También hay un tratado que también se está negociando sobre derechos humanos y empresas en la ONU y casi es lo mismo. Es posible de que esto, el Tratado de la No Proliferación del Carbono también se una con el otro, porque estaba viendo de que casi nacen del mismo año estas iniciativas. Entonces, sabemos que el carbono emite empresas del norte global. Entonces, es posible que se unan para unir esfuerzos para que avance, porque si no… creo que vamos a seguir dando vueltas, caemos un círculo vicioso y no vamos a tener ningún resultado, y sabemos que los que han salido afectados somos nosotros, los pueblos indígenas, y también puedo decir que somos inteligentes porque nosotros no destruimos nuestra casa, nuestro hogar, sino que al contrario lo protegemos. En cambio esta gente lo destruye. Entonces a veces digo, tienen mentes tan retrógradas que destruyes tu misma casa, pues entonces ¿a dónde vas a ir? No hay otro. Entonces, bueno, dejo esa reflexión. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por la pregunta y también por la lucha para realizar los avances hacia este tratado, que ha sido de verdad una inspiración para nosotros, porque lo que nos ha mostrado es que un movimiento ciudadano, un movimiento afuera de los estados, pueden crear las condiciones políticas para impulsar la negociación de un tratado. Entonces estamos muy dispuestos de unir fuerzas con los movimientos sociales que están avanzando para ese tratado, y de hecho muchas de las organizaciones de la campaña son los mismos, pero hay una distinción en nuestra visión, porque nosotros estamos enfocados en las responsabilidades de los estados. Queremos crear normas para los estados que van a aplicar pues a las empresas que están causando los daños, pero lo que entiendo yo hasta ahora, pero podemos hablar más profundo después, es que ese tratado que mencionaste tú es sobre las empresas y sobre sus obligaciones abajo del derecho internacional. Entonces es un poquito distinto porque el sujeto son en un caso las empresas. Es muy importante que creamos un tratado con obligaciones muy vinculantes y fuertes para las obligaciones de las empresas, pero es un poquito distinto de las obligaciones de los estados al respecto de la expansión de la industria petrolero, de gas y de carbón. Gracias.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, and thank you for your questions. I want to thank all the speakers that are here. I understand this is the last session for our Indigenous Pavilion, and I'd like to thank the staff. I'd like to thank the staff who are managing this, and the interpreters that have been involved. We thank all the different funders who have made this possible, of this Indigenous Pavilion. And for myself, I'm going to go back and find out where the Conference of the Party is right now, if they're going to extend the COP meeting for another day. It's very critical that your voices are heard here, because I understand there's watered down texts that's being presented from the negotiating groups of using reduction instead of phase out. And I thought that they were going to say phase down, but it's very critical that we stand together to demand a phase out of the production and mining of fossil fuels. It's very important, especially at source. So we heard your voices throughout the days. I've heard many of you present before. Some of you come from contaminated lands where petroleum pollution is still staying on your land, especially in Peru. I've heard stories like that, and it's we have to make a stand here. Final words. I know press will be looking to hear from you. We need to stand strong and united. So thank you very much. Heheha and Wopeda Tonka. Thank you.